Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a journey through another mecha anime, but this time it hails from the dark ages of the early 2010s. Barring a couple of the Gundam series that I have covered from that time, I haven't really looked at too much stuff from 2010 until now. One reason for that is just that I'm really drawn to the older stuff, and I like shedding light on some of that, but another is that mecha anime in particular has been in a relative dark age for a while. I would say that 2018 is when things started to look up for the genre again, and we've gotten some great entries since then. But today, I want to talk about a show from 2014 that is not only still a beautiful piece of animation, it's also just really damn good. Breakblade originates from a 2006 manga series of the same name by author Yosuke Yoshinaga that spans 20 volumes and ended its original run in 2022. In 2010, the series began to be adapted into a set of 6 50-minute movies by Production IG and Studio Xebec. And then in 2014, those movies were cut down into a 12-episode long TV anime. Breakblade is a fantasy mecha series, which is one of my favorite subgenres, so I was pretty excited to start 2024 off with this series. Unlike Ray Earth, one of the other mecha fantasy shows I've looked at on this channel, Breakblade is a lot more grounded and takes place in a world that's a lot more realized and realistic, with a magic system that is incredibly fleshed out and an important part of everyday life, even down to the lowliest commoner. So what happens when someone cannot use magic at all? That is the dilemma of our protagonist, Rygart Arrow. Rygart is an unsorcerer, someone who cannot use magic at all, and because magic in this world is required to activate a mineral resource called quartz that is used in basically every common application in life, well, things are pretty hard for our blonde-haired MC. I mean, without innately being able to activate quartz in the world of Breakblade, you can't even turn on a microwave? So how does Rygart find himself mixed up in a war that could decide the fate of the entire continent? Let's find out. Breakblade begins with our main man, Rygart, receiving a summons from the ruler of the land of Krishna, King Hodor. Oh yeah, also heads up, even in the sub version of this show, some characters pronounce Krishna, and some pronounce it Krishna, like a Hare Krishna, so I'm gonna go ahead and pronounce it that way. It seems to be the more common way of doing it. Rygart leaves his little brother to deal with the harvest alone, which kinda harsh, and sets out on a journey across the desert to visit the capital city of Binonten. This journey is much more dangerous than one might think because the country of Krishna is covered in rocky canyons and badlands. And while vehicles do exist in this world, Rygart can't activate them because he can't use quartz. Krishna is a country that is incredibly resource rich in a mineral called quartz, which is like the fantasy equivalent on sitting on top of a ton of oil, and I think that's a really cool touch to this setting. While the country obviously has its own agricultural harvest and access to water, the magical ore is its main power and export. A man with white hair and cool sunglasses finds Rygart passed out in the middle of the Badlands and reveals himself to be Balder, General of Krishna. He was sent by King Hodor to retrieve Rygart, but remarks that he's got no idea how the king would even know Rygart was out here. When they arrive at the capital, he first meets the Queen, a blonde scientist named Segan, who immediately holds him at gunpoint and demands to know why he didn't show up for the king and queen's wedding. Also, please bear with me on some pronunciations on this one. A lot of these names are Icelandic in origin, especially ones like Segan, so I've tried to look up how to pronounce those correctly. Obviously, we all know that's not my forte, so let's move on. The tension of the moment fades as we realize that the two are old friends from their time at the military academy. What a coincidence! I also always point a gun directly at my friend's face when I haven't seen them in years. Rygart then meets with Hodor, and I absolutely love Hodor's design, plus he's a pretty chill guy and seems like he just wants to hang out, which, you know, maybe not the best attitude for a king whose country is at war, but I would hit a hookah with him. While the reunion seems to be going pretty well, Rygart asks if Zess is coming to join them, and this casts a shadow over the king and queen. Hodor explains to Rygart that Zess, once their friend at the military academy, is now a captain in the armed forces of the country of Athens. Even worse news than that is that Assam, the country that borders Krishna to the north, has undergone a coup and is now siding with Athens to the west. With no buffer zone between the two countries now, it seems like war is an inevitability. And Hodor explains that while he hasn't revealed this fact to the general citizenry yet, fighting has already broken out along the border. While Rygart and his royal friends are reuniting, Zess is leading a squad of golems in an advanced task force to strike at Binonten. Golems are breakblades mecha, huge lumbering machines of war armed with giant swords, shields, and rifles. Like all the other tech in this world, golems are powered through quartz, and it apparently taxes the pilot quite heavily to command such a huge machine from the ore. The Athens golems are painted a bright yellow, and the skill of the pilots combined with their firepower totally outmatches the defending Krishnians. Zess and his squad hope to fight their way into the border of the capital city to capture Hodor, and we see that Zess hopes for a quick end to the bloodshed. As proficient as he is at fighting, he doesn't exactly seem to enjoy it, unlike one of his squad mates, Lee, who is kind of a typical crazy mech pilot chick trope. There's also Cleo, who's the most inexperienced and youngest of the pilots. I mean, she's literally a child soldier, there's no getting around that. There's also Agarth, a blonde pilot that gets very little screen time, and finally there's a bald guy whose name is Eric. Rygart is taken to a deep quartz mine outside the city where Hodor shows him a startling discovery. An ancient golem, once interred in the stone tomb of the mine, has been discovered, but its mechanisms are confusing and not even the most skilled pilot can get it to power on. Yeah, even more disturbing is the fact that the mummified corpse that they found in the pilot's seat showed no signs of being able to activate quartz. Hodor tells Rygart that he doesn't want to fight a war, especially not one against his friend and the powerful country of Athens. However, the price for surrender is high, as Athens has demanded the complete surrender of the entire country, but also the lives of the royal family. And while Hodor would happily give his own life for that of his people, he won't surrender the life of Queen Segan. As the two talk, an alarm sounds, and we realize that Zess's squad has arrived at the city gates in a surprise attack. The mine starts to crumble, and Rygart falls into the golem's cockpit. The golem's computer system begins to boot at the presence of an unsorcerer, and when Rygart tries to read the ancient letters on the computer screen, he accidentally registers himself as the pilot. The golem then blasts itself skyward and out of the mineshaft, shaking off the petrified quartz that still clings to its frame. The machine lands directly in front of the attacking Athens mecha, just in time to save King Hodor, who was about to be totally pulverized by its giant gun. Rygart is able to quickly figure out how to move the golem around and rams the Athens mech into a cliff. The pilot appears to be knocked out, so he takes a moment to figure out how to move the arms and legs effectively. Man, it really seems like Rygart is a natural. Zess shows up and sees it as his opportunity to take out the king, not believing him when he says that Rygart is piloting the under golem. But when General Baldur and his squad arrive, Zess is content to take Lee and retreat. We get this scene later that day where Zess's squad are all discussing the attack and making fun of Cleo for being a pretty bad shot. Well, mostly it's Lee kind of making fun of her in a big sister sort of way. She makes a remark about Cleo having big boobs for a 12-year-old. And at first I thought she was saying this to mean that like Cleo is really immature, but no, Cleo is actually 12, which means she is a child soldier. This is kind of a thing that the show makes a point out of to bring up multiple times, that Cleo is only 12, but she has the body of like a late teenager, which I don't really know if that's just anime weirdness or if there's like something else beyond that in the manga. At one point, Rygart does remark that when he sees her and learns that she's only like 12 years old, he thinks that like Athens is literally experimenting on her. So I thought there was going to be like, oh, they're giving her like growth hormone to grow soldiers faster or something, but it never comes up again. So I don't know. If you've read the whole manga, comment below on whether it's just anime being anime or it's there's actually a reason for it. Besides just being the queen, Sigyn is a very prominent scientist, and in her lab we get to see the golems in intricate detail, along with their armor and weaponry. Gotta love how simple the rifles are. They're pretty much just giant nail guns that fire slabs of quartz. They put new armor on the undergolem made of unresponsive dud quartz, but more importantly, the machine seems to be completely powered down after the battle, leading most of the scientists to think it's now broken beyond repair. Sigyn says they need to completely strip the mech down, but lack the technological ability to do so, saying that she doesn't really understand how the ancients built it. Sigyn gets so involved in asking Rygart about the mech that she basically pins him to the wall, and I can't help but notice that she ain't wearing a wedding ring. I don't know, man, she's the queen and all, so it's risky, but Sigyn is a baddie with that Red Riding Hood fit, so I'd go for it. Can you blame me? Look at how she falls asleep. No one does that by accident.
Oh no, Rygart. I just happened to fall asleep almost naked with my ass up in the air. The least comfortable sleeping position ever.
I mean, I do have to say this show is really interested in showing you Sigyn in various states of undress, and well, I can't say I really ever minded it. Bet this isn't how country girls sleep, you illiterate bitch. The next morning, Zess's squad attacks the city's northern gate, hoping to destroy 20 Kryznan golems in a bid to get Hoder to realize that fighting Athens' superior golems is hopeless. While one of the Kryznan generals named True says the undergolem is trash and should be scrapped to make space, Rygart is able to get the thing running again and decides to take it to the north gate to get Zess to retreat. Zess is taken aback when he sees the golem approaching bearing a flag that only he would recognize, and he takes it as a sign that they want to negotiate. Rygart asks Zess why they're invading. Zess always hated war, and the only reason he joined the military in the first place was to rein in his older brother, who has a higher position in the military hierarchy. And the group were all such good friends back in academy. It's only been a few years. It's hard for Rygart to understand why he would do this, and Zess only replies that he has a valid reason, or that the country of Athens has a valid reason. When grilled further, Zess does say that the country of Orlando attacked the northern territory of Assam, and Krishna let soldiers through their territory in order for them to do it. From all that we've seen of Hoder so far, that does not really seem like something he would agree to. He isn't really the scheming type. Zess says that Orlando use international military training as a smokescreen to move their troops. Zess then all but begs Rygart to get Hoder to surrender, warning that if he does not, then Athens will dispatch their notorious general Borcuse with 200 golems to slaughter them all. One small wrench in the works, though, is that Zess does not seem to know about the whole kill the entire royal family thing that Athens has put up as a condition. General True is spotted approaching from the west and leads his men right into a trap where they can all get shot at. He doesn't even get to use this big shiny sword that he was so proud of. Cleo finally hits something and blows off the arm of True's golem, causing the general to retreat. This actually ends up helping though, as Rygart is chased by Lee and shot at, but when the dust settles, it's revealed that he blocked all of her bullets with the giant sword. Sigyn is utterly amazed that the undergolem is strong enough to swing the claymore like a one-handed sword, and as Rygart fights Lee and she shoots him directly in the stomach, we also see that it has a hardened inner frame that is nearly impenetrable. Not even grappling the black golem can stop it, as Rygart simply breaks both of Lee's golem's arms and gets away. Finally rendezvousing with a Krishna soldier named Dan, who blows out both of Lee's ankles, leaving her in a crumpled heap of twisted quartz. Rygart tries to communicate with Dan, but because he can't control quartz, he can't even speak through the microphone. Dan wants to kill Lee and get it over with, but he's shot directly in the cockpit by her from afar, showing that even a crippled golem can be incredibly dangerous. Rygart then calls her an asshole, which is appropriate, and throws his lance at her hard enough that it blasts her golem into a mangled wreck. Lee, however, is not dead yet, and she screams that she would rather die than be humiliated and taken prisoner by Krishnan barbarians. And then she takes her own life. Zess and his squad flee, with Eric having seen what happened and tells Zess that Rygart was the one who killed Lee. Rygart visits the cemetery after the battle and comes face to face with Dan's widow. And while Rygart says to himself that he carries no blame for Dan's death, I mean, he says he never even saw his face, so why should he care? While he's thinking that, he's squeezing his own hand so hard that he bruises it, so obviously the guy is carrying a lot of internal guilt. While Rygart thinks he can't really do anything to help as an unsorcerer and decides to leave, it's facing King Hodor at the gate that makes him rethink his position. Hodor tells him to leave, it's not his fight, and had he known Zess would attack so suddenly, he never would have invited Rygart into this trouble in the first place. As Rygart turns to leave, he remembers the words of his father, telling him that, it's okay to run if you feel scared. There's no shame in walking away. But it's these reassuring words from the specter of Rygart's path that rekindles a fire in his heart. Rygart has issues with his father, thinking him stupid for spending so much money trying to overcome Rygart's inability to use magic. And so while this is supposed to be a reassuring thing for him, Rygart rebukes this thought that you can just leave your problems behind, and he turns back to Hodor, ready to fight for his friend no matter the cost. While all this is happening, Sigyn finally has a breakthrough translating the text etched into the Undergolem's chassis, a message that simply says, "Let us fight destiny." We are officially introduced to General Borcuse, the eye-patch-wearing terror of Athens, who was apparently so brutal in the Assam campaign that he was court-martialed and forced into retirement. The Secretary of War, a solemn man named Loki, who is also Zess's brother, is wary of Krishna allying with Orlando and has Borcuse reinstated. Now, I love Borcuse's design, and he is voiced by Kazuya Nakai, the guy who plays Zoro in One Piece, so that's just a major plus. That's saying a lot too, because I really like most of the designs in this show. In fact, I'm kind of in love with this whole art style. Hey man, I'm a sucker for the clean line work, and the golems and their weaponry are right up my alley. Rygart is knighted in a ceremony where Hodor himself steps in to perform the duties in a show of how close they are. He's placed in charge of the Undergolem along with Sigyn, and they've decided to give the mech a name, Delphine. They also strap some new armor onto it that makes it look like a moving fortress, and overall just really badass. Good thing that they've started realizing what some of the gauges on the Undergolem's dashboard mean, because Zess's squad decide to execute one more strike unbeknownst. Cleo is quickly changing from the naive young soldier to someone more determined, and takes the loss of Lee pretty personally, seeing as how they both came from the same hometown. Lee and Cleo both really hate the country of Krishna, and the reason given is that when Cleo was young, the Krishnan War of Independence broke out, and their soldiers massacred civilians in her town. One thing that I really like about Rygart is he doesn't dance around the fact that he killed Lee, and he takes direct responsibility for it. Sigyn tells him that, she took her own life and he didn't really have anything to do with that, but Rygart meant for that throw to be a kill shot, and he says himself that he knows it was a life or death decision. Despite Rygart's resentful attitude towards his deceased father, which we can gather is mostly from guilt, Rygart does display a level of emotional maturity that makes him an easy protagonist to root for. It's also nice to have a main character that's pretty three-dimensional and well written. I think mecha anime fares pretty well in this area in general, and Rygart is very well done in that regard. Balder enters the room and tells them that the enemy squad has been spotted approaching the gates, and that they're ready to sortie. It will be the Delphine's first official launch and operation. Zess's squad is actually forced to retreat, and we get a good display at how good he actually is as a pilot. He takes out 2 Krysnan golems at once. Once the squad makes it to the Badlands, Zess notices something following them at immense speed. Surprise, it's Rygart in the Delphine, and despite all that hulking armor, he's flying across the desert like a meteor. And much like a meteor, he blasts through Agarth's golem, which obliterates it completely, and we just get a shot of Rygart saying, like, he's dead, right? Which really stood out to me. He hopes it was a quick kill and says to himself that he doesn't blame himself for doing it, which really seems like he's trying to convince himself in that moment. Rygart sheds the enormous armor in order to go even faster, making an attempt to destroy Zess's rifle. He misses and sails right past the Athenian mech, realizing that the second the Delphine lands, he'll be gunned down by Cleo and Eric. So he does one of the coolest things that I've seen in a mecha anime. Rygart turns off the automatic posture control of the golem, then stabs the claymore into the ground, using it as a springboard to jump off of and send him back towards Zess. He flies through the air, slamming his secondary sword directly into Zess's golem's cockpit, a move that would have killed the ace if it weren't for Rygart pulling back at the last second. He could not bring himself to take the life of a friend when it came down to it. Seeing Zess defeated in combat makes Cleo spring into action without even thinking, and while before she could barely hit an enemy golem, now she holds off an entire line of Krysnan mechs herself while Eric removes Zess from the cockpit. Despite going insano mode, Cleo's golem is disabled by General True's troops, and she's captured. Segan decides that she wants to take charge of Cleo, and she shows her a kindness that is the exact opposite of what Cleo expected. Unfortunately, Cleo is able to wrestle Segan's gun away from her and force her to switch clothing in an attempt to escape. They get to the hangar and Segan even pulls the trigger on an unaware Rygart, only to find out that Segan doesn't keep her gun loaded, so, good try. The Krysnan engineers waste no time in repainting and outfitting the captured Athens Artemis, and a mysterious red-haired man in glasses is brought before it in handcuffs. He is told that he's expected to pilot it as part of the newly formed Delphine squad, but this guy seems kinda nuts, so I'm sure that'll come up later. Narvi, one of General True's soldiers, is made captain of the Millennium Corp, a special squad of commandos with customized golems that operate solely at the king's discretion. Besides Narvi, Rygart and the prisoner named, this is how it's spelled, and I quadruple listen double hard, and it is pronounced Girge, so I'm doing the best I can. There's also Narvi's brother Niles and the blonde-haired Logan. The scene immediately cuts to Rygart fighting with Girge during a training exercise, though it could easily be mistaken for a life-or-death battle. Even when the rest of the squad gets involved, it still ends in a draw. Though skilled, Girge is definitely, troubled. Balder talks to Rygart one night and tells him that 1 year ago, Girge killed his squad mate and wounded a few others during a training exercise for absolutely no reason. Balder then drops the truth bomb that Girge is his son and asks Rygart to kill him if he tries to betray them again. And Rygart is like, no, if you want to kill your own son, you can do it yourself, you weirdo. While the Millennium Corp train in their new golems, the rest of Krysna's military moves out. Rygart trains in CQC because even in the Delphine, he can't activate quartz in any of the pressure guns, so he has to rely on melee weapons and quick thinking. The night before the Millennium Corp leave, Segan has a flashback to the time in the academy when Rygart left because he just didn't have enough money to pay for tuition, and even when Hoder offered to pay it for him, he got really upset. She goes to see him in the morning, telling him that she's very angry, and the only way she'll feel better is if he doesn't die and he comes back. Segan definitely harbors feelings for Rygart, and is also having a really hard time coming to terms with that. Rygart promises he'll come back, though that promise may be harder to keep than he thinks. As on the front lines, General True is killed by an Athenian golem with giant saw arms. General Balder is shocked to learn that True's troops were ambushed so far inside the border and realizes that it won't be long before they suffer the same fate. The golem with saw arms is piloted by Athenian newcomer Nike, a 25-year-old woman who wears tiny pants and a midriff-bearing shirt, because anime. Also, she has a puppy-like need to be pet on the head by her commander, Colonel Io, because anime. Nike is the second crazy female mech pilot that this show introduces, and it's starting to make me think that the author has a type. Io is essentially the new Zess for the second half of the series, which brings me to my only real major complaint with Breakblade. This show has a great setting, deep characters, and an interesting magic/tech system, but none of it gets explored deeply enough. The ending of this season is incredibly abrupt and solves almost nothing. And most notably, Zess never shows up again until the very end in one scene. While this is realistic because he was wounded by Rygart, it's unsatisfying that we just never get a resolution to his story. I guess I have another manga to read, huh? Unless someone wants to pick up Breakblade for another season, which would be an interesting choice at this point, but since the manga just ended last year, it's not out of the question, I suppose. Balder and his soldiers are holed up on this bluff, a very easily defensible position, and he has about 20 more golems than General Borcuse at his command. He tells one of his lieutenants, Elsa, to take 20 golems and charge their line in a blitz with covering fire from the rest of his troops. Elsa charges into the Athenian line, but confusingly they just let the group pass. The confusion is quickly dispelled when it becomes apparent that Elsa's group is being allowed near General Borcuse to send a message. The general's personal squad takes down the entire Christian force with extreme brutality. And Borcuse even has Nike rip off Elsa's golem's arms and legs and wave it around. This demoralizes Balder's men and they start to panic. But Balder is an experienced general as well, and he understands how to turn fear into rage. While raging soldiers fight less efficiently, they will fight to their last breath, and Borcuse realizes that he may have created a dangerous situation for himself, though he doesn't seem to worry much about it. The Christian soldiers charge but are quickly surrounded. Balder's men are cut down one by one, and just when you think the general and his troops will meet up with True soon enough, Delphine shows up and starts kicking ass. Rygart was supposed to engage first, and then retreat when his armor is worn down. But we see that inside the cockpit, Rygart is pushing himself to become a cold-blooded killer. While he attempts to detach himself and gain a calculated mental state, we never really get the idea that it's working. Rygart definitely seems to carry the guilt with himself, and this becomes evident in those fleeting, quiet moments. Well, you can't blame him. While he did attend the military academy, Rygart isn't a soldier, he's a farmer, and dirt poor to boot. Despite all that, Rygart does incredibly well, taking out enough Athenian golems to give Balder's men some hope. He purges his armor while getting long-range sniper support from Login. Narvi and the others are finally in range, but when she orders them to attack, Girge pretends to freak out, saying that he's never seen real combat and can't fight. Narvi and Nile just leave him there and proceed to fight off some Athenian golems, only to find that the entire right flank has been ordered to retreat. Borcuse is seen retreating through the canyons when one of his men is sniped in a single shot. Girge then engages the general's squad, and he's honestly probably the best pilot in the show. I don't know how much of that comes down to the fact that he's piloting the Artemis, which is more advanced than any of the Krishnan golems, but he really rips through them. Rygart watches everything from on top of a nearby bluff with the Delphine's camera. Girge then escapes off camera and tells Narvi that he just ran away when the enemy found him, but Rygart saw everything and calls him out on the lie. Rygart and his squad are supposed to meet up with Balder and then return to the capital to mount a defense. However, Narvi mentions that the enemy were spotted near a place called Pegusa. Rygart gets worried because his hometown, where his brother still resides, is near Pegusa, and even though he's reassured that the villagers must have been evacuated, he can't get it out of his mind. He runs to the Delphine and takes off toward the village, outpacing anyone that would chase after him. He arrives to find the village destroyed and the citizens executed and laying in the streets. Of course, this is a trap by Borcuse, as he and his men encircle Rygart. Borcuse is so intrigued by the strength of the Delphine that he tells his men that he'll kill them if they interfere and challenges Rygart to a duel. Well, it's less of a challenge and more, I'm gonna kill you and you can't get away, so you may as well fight me. Rygart struggles in his fight against the general, and while he's still incredibly skilled at piloting the Delphine, he's quickly down to his last weapon. The Eastern Blade is basically just a giant mech katana, which is cool, but its cool points just can't stand up to the general. Rygart is knocked around the cockpit so much that he loses consciousness, and Borcuse has his men chain the golem up. Borcuse believes that the country of Orlando wanted to get their hands on the Undergolem, and while we never really see this scheme on screen, or much of Orlando at all, really, it does make the world feel that much bigger. I just wish there was much more exploration on that front because I do genuinely enjoy the world and setting of Breakblade. When Rygart regains consciousness, he realizes that they're trying to get him out of the cockpit. He starts thrashing around and we see that Narvi and the rest of the squad have caught up. Rygart gets long-range sniper support from Login and is able to make it to their location. However, they are attacked by Borcuse's men shortly after he arrives. Narvi's golem is destroyed by Nikke, but she's able to bail out before she gets too badly injured. Rygart begs Girge to go back and help out the rest of the squad, but he refuses, saying that if they die, it's because they're pathetic weaklings and they don't deserve any pity, and this causes Rygart to fly into a rage and attack his red-haired squad mate. Girge says that everyone knows that the queen wants to bang him, and that if he wins the fight, they can go to the castle together and kidnap Sigyn, which is an insane suggestion from Girge, but he's meant to be off his rocker, so, you know. Rygart says that he wishes that Girge would become a general of Krishna and surpass his father. But before Girge can even react to that, Nikke shows up to interrupt their fight. With the Delphine completely powered down and out of time, Girge decides to defend it. Maybe hearing Rygart's wish softened him, or maybe it was just his whim. Either way, he engages and defeats Nikke in single combat, and then has to face a group of elites called the Spartan Squad. Even for a bunch of jobbers, the Spartan Squad put on a good show, but they're all killed off by Girge one by one. By the end of it, the Artemis is blown into pieces and even gets caught and held.
I killed 50 men.
But Girge takes every one of them out, including the commander. The regular Athens forces show up and shoot at Girge, and Rygart finally loses his grip on the cliff and falls into the ravine below in the inner Delphine. When Rygart finally wakes up, he is moving once again, but instead of being tied down, this time it's General Baldur's men carrying him back to Binonten. Hodor has called back all available troops to the capital city, and the evacuation of civilians has already begun. Unfortunately, Borcuse arrives before the returning forces and begins his attack on the city at dawn. We also see that between episodes, Girge was captured by Borcuse, but when he wouldn't answer any questions about who pilots the Black Golem, Borcuse just executes him on the spot. While the general launches his attack on the city, Baldur leaves Rygart outside the gates with the inert Delphine. The armor is replaced in the downtime, and this is probably Rygart's lowest point that we get to see. While he's made it back to the city, he's left powerless outside, thinks the rest of his squad is dead, and he never found his brother. So as the Delphine finally awakens, Rygart seems more determined to make a difference than ever before. While Rygart doesn't know it at the moment, the other members of the Millennium Corp are making their way to the city in a mostly destroyed golem. They're able to get into some fresh mechs and end up engaging Colonel Io in the city. Io met up with an escaping Cleo, who wants to go back to Athens but has conflicting feelings about her time with Sigyn. She has to escape alone as Io and Niall fight, and we're left to hope that the hatred for Krishna that she shared with Lee has softened. Io appears to be killed by Niall, but we see that the lance that pierced his chest armor stopped a few inches short, mostly because Niall appears to want to fight Io again. Rygart enters the city and heads towards the palace, meeting General Borcuse on the highway that leads directly there. The Delphine has new armor, but it is otherwise unarmed, and Borcuse doesn't wish to fight him when he has no weapons, seeing no challenge in it. Rygart engages him anyway, and the general is surprised by his untrained fighting style that only really works because of how the Undergolem operates. Rygart is able to pull off intricate moves that would apparently be impossible with a golem controlled through quartz. Once again, we get a really great display of combat, and I am consistently impressed with how well Breakblade is able to translate the weight and momentum of the golems on screen. Partly I think that's because they take advantage of cockpit shots and are great at translating the movement of the golems to inertia in the cockpit. When you see the Delphine do a crazy move and then you cut to Rygart being strained against his restraints, almost passing out from how forcefully he's being tossed around, well, it really sells it. We also just don't get melee-focused mecha combat enough, and if I had to make a comparison to another show, I would say that Iron-Blooded Orphans really reminds me of Breakblade. Despite all of Rygart's determination, he's put on the ropes by General Borcuse. That is, until Segan shows up with a secret weapon that she's been working away on in her lab. She delivers a giant ninja star, but instead of throwing it, you just swing it around on a giant rope made of quartz ligament. This detail is pretty important because the ligament is incredibly tough, even while not activated by a sorcerer. So Borcuse can't destroy the weapon's only weak point. The two fight until Rygart's cockpit is completely exposed, and Borcuse's mech is torn to pieces by the weight of the huge club. Finally, Borcuse just gets out of the cockpit and starts shooting at Rygart through the gap in his armor, and Rygart just smashes him, turning him into a puddle. Ending the series with Rygart finally having to actually witness the human that he is killing, well, it's definitely an exclamation point for sure. We get word that the rest of the Athenian soldiers in the city get word of the general's death and break ranks by midday. Finally, as Rygart reunites with Segan, telling her that he kept his promise to come back, his brother Rygart stumbles up to them. Apparently, after Rygart left, he got really worried because Rygart didn't even tell him where he was going or for how long. So this kid walked all the way to the capital only to see his brother liquefy some guy. Rygart laughs until he cries, and the series comes to a close. Wow, man, what an ending. Obviously, this is not where the story ends, and the manga carries on, but in animated form, this is all we got. While Binonten and Krishna is safe for the moment, having driven off Athens' most notorious general, Athens is still going through a resource crisis, so yeah, they're not in the clear yet. And it's really too bad that Breakblade never got any sort of animated follow-up, because the character's story and presentation are all really well done. Breakblade definitely lived up to the expectations that I had for it after so many people left it in the comments as a suggestion. The animation, music, and setting are right up my alley, and hey, I always have more room for Mech-Fantasy in my life. I would say that even though the anime does remain unfinished, it's definitely worth a watch, especially if you love the weighty melee combat of something like IBO. And while I call it Mech-Fantasy, it is a lot more grounded than another entry into the genre like Rayearth. This is just a very specific type of show that doesn't get made very often, and I can only hope that with the manga being finished relatively recently, we see some sort of follow-up or resolution. If you enjoyed today's video, consider leaving a like down below or yelling at me in the comments, that's fine too. I have to say that this show has definitely made me a little bit more intrigued about the early to mid 2010s as a time for mecha anime. Before this, it was just sort of a dark cloud in my mind, with some of the least liked Gundam shows and a rash of CG animation before CG had really caught up to the quality standard to not be butt ugly. So maybe we should take a look at some more stuff from this time period this year. I know how people love All Noah Zero. They don't. Anyway, be on the lookout for more in the future, plus the 90s and 80s greatness that I love to explore. See you next time. Hey everyone, welcome to today's end card. I'm actually feeling a little bit energetic, probably because I didn't record this at 2 a.m. for some reason. Anyway, let me thank my channel members, aka Batosai, Argent, Griever, Ashar Khazar, Brian Sanchez, D. Mells, Daniel Johnson, Deader V, Dilla Soul, Gert, Joe Castellanos, Joe Cavazos, John Lamb, Johnny G, Canto 20, McLean Nugent, Mr. Smash, Zappa Slave, Video Gamer 75, Trey Hardy, and Sindustries. Thank you all very much for continuing to be channel members. If anyone else would like to join the illustrious league of people that give me a few dollars a month because they like the sound of my voice, well, you can hit that button and it will make you feel better about yourself, and it will make me feel better about myself too, and that's what's most important. I'm full of beans on this end card today for some reason. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Breakblade was really, really cool, so I would never have heard about this show if people didn't comment it a lot. So keep commenting shows that you want me to see. I do have a giant, like Google Doc page with all of the suggestions and things I've already done on it, so I am keeping track of like every suggestion I get usually. And yeah, I have a lot on there. I usually do weigh them by how long they are. If you guys want a little sneak peek thing coming up next, obviously we have the Big O, which I'm super excited about because that show's amazing, by the way. We have Gundam Build Fighters coming up next, which I know a lot of people are excited for and a lot of people hate. And then after that, I haven't really announced anything, but I think I'm going to be looking at a longer show that's 50 episodes from the 80s, so we'll see. And then after that, we're moving on to another Gundam show that no one likes, which is what is it, Reconquista in G, which apparently a lot of people really hate that show. I don't know anything about it, but I am kind of excited to see it because like I think the divisive ones are really interesting, and then I get to make an interesting video. So anyway, I'm rambling. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. 2024, I think the channel's gonna kick ass. I've been really revitalized after the holidays this year, and something about 2023 just really drained me. You know, I did like half the videos I did in 2022 in 2023, and a lot of the 2023 videos were longer. I think 2024 is going to be really good though, so I'm excited for this year. I hope you guys are excited for this year. Thank you all for liking, subbing, doing all the shit that you're awesome at doing, and I will see you next time.